Hey, folks, if you want early access to episodes as they drop, click that subscribe button, join us, and together we'll fix the broken U.S. healthcare system. We'll see you on the next one.
Get ready to take control of your healthcare. Here's your host, Ray Kober.
And we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Broken Healthcare. My name is Ray Kober. I am your host, and I am honored to have with us our next guest, Chris Deacon. Chris Deacon is an attorney extraordinaire who had several encounters with the healthcare system. She ran the state of New Jersey, at least on the healthcare side of the house. She's written a book called The Great American Healthcare Heist. I have notes. Be afraid, Chris. Be very afraid. And without further ado, welcome from across the pond in the UK, Chris Deacon. Welcome to the big show, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Oh, it's an honor for us to have you here. So I've been trampling in these healthcare, anti-status quo healthcare on that circuit now for many years. And I've seen Chris on stage. Chris, I've seen you on stage multiple times. You never disappoint. I think the last time I saw you, if I'm not mistaken, was at Health Rosetta or Rosetta Fest. And you really kind of brought it, which is amazing. And I think before we get into the book and all of that stuff, the question that's on my mind is, why did you move across the pond? Well, I'm sorry if you're not expecting this, but welcome to Broken Healthcare. I'm the host that's out of control, and I need to know, most people are dying to get into the United States of America. You were like, you know what? I'm going to go there. So what's that all about?
Well, I have a couple of, sort of funny answers, and then I'll give you the real one. First, I wanted to research my next book, which is a comparison of socialized medicine to the U.S. Healthcare system. So I'm getting some real on-the-ground experience and research done here, but not the reason I moved here. Second, after news last week or 2 weeks ago now broke about the whistleblower case against Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield that settled for $100 million. Some people assume I'm in witness protection or some sort of program.
That's what I was thinking.
That is also not the reason I'm here. It was a job opportunity for my spouse, and we decided it was, would be a fun experience and life-changing experience for the kids. I have 3 young kids. And it's been amazing for them. They're loving it. I'm still adjusting. And, at this time of year, I'm especially missing my home country.
I got you. So I know that you ran the healthcare program for the state of New Jersey. Were you always in New Jersey, or did you start out somewhere else? What are your roots in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I am a military brat. I was born in Colorado, where we last saw each other, I think, and moved around extensively as a kid. My dad was a Black Hawk pilot. Went to school in Washington, D.C.
Service. We appreciate that. Love the military guys.
Yes.
And gal. Yeah.
Well, and my mom was a Navy nurse, so
nice.
two parents in the service.
Double threat. Yeah.
I went to school in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University. Then I went to law school at Rutgers in New Jersey, and never left New Jersey after that. So while I haven't been a New Jersey girl my whole life, it's definitely the longest I've lived anywhere, just about 20 years. So wow. I do consider New Jersey home in many ways.
Wow. So tell, as much as I'm fascinated about the book and your background, which it goes without saying is beyond impressive. I'm a student of kind of people, and it interests me, and I have a natural curiosity about the experience, because you said you're still kind of settling in. So I wonder, like, what are the biggest differences between living here versus living there? Or I don't know if you could simplify it and boil it down to that, but what are some of the things that you miss, and what are some of the things that you don't miss so much?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest differences is and this is going to sound a little strange, but let me explain, is the whole idea of customer service So let me explain. In the United States, and whether it's customer service at a retail establishment or a food establishment, or even how you're interacting with like a government service, there's just in the United States, there's an eagerness to generally speaking, to get it right, to please the customer, just very consumer focused, not
Mm,
necessarily again about the retail aspect, but um, the customer in any sort of capacity, perhaps not in the healthcare system, but um, and there's just an absence of that here, not because people are rude or it's bad. It's just very, very different.
mm.
Um, there's a joke that British people love to queue, have a line up, and and that's generally people are fine to wait, and I miss that go, 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 especially after being in the Northeast in New Jersey. I'm not probably as patient as I once was. That's very
Right.
different. I'd say
Yeah.
the other thing I would highlight, and I gotta, again, shout out to my home country. I have two girls. Women's sports in the UK are, I would say, a decade or more behind the US.
Oh,
I
wow. No kidding.
I never appreciated the impact of Title IX the way I do now. Um, if,
There you go with
if
that, there you go with that lawyer talk again. What do you
I
mean? What's the Title
Title
IX?
IX. So, the landmark legislation that essentially tried to get equal funding for men and women's sports.
Right.
And, even is a very progressive country,
Yeah.
England and the UK generally. And it is shocking, really. It still is shocking to me how much I have to advocate for my girls in sports, and just sort of the acceptance of, there's still such a disparity. So, maybe that'll be my new cause, women's sports in the UK.
Now, do your daughter support you in this, or are they like, "Oh, mom, please don't"? Is it causing them, friction with their peers, or is it all cool?
I think it's all cool. I mean, my girls, they can probably tell you what a third party administrator is. So, they're very well versed in what
Or
I
girls?
do. Yeah. They're fighters, and
Yeah.
I think, they wouldn't tell me that they're frustrated perhaps with playing time, or, the boys versus the girls disparity, if they didn't want mom to do something about it, or at least
Right.
try.
I got you. So, all in all, though, it's not a night and day difference, right? You seem to have a lovely home if that's where you are. Seems like you got a smile on your face. You're in a
Yeah.
good place. The kids are good. So it's not if all of a sudden people's worst fears came to fruition and Donald Trump became king and they had to flee. It's not the end of the world. You could go and
Yeah.
set up shop somewhere else and
Yeah.
live to fight another day, right? Okay,
Yes,
good.
you could come where I live, where we actually have a real king.
A
You
real
forget.
king.
Yes.
By the way, speaking of that, I will be in. This is a early preview, folks, but I have the authentic Winston Churchill will be on the big show in January. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, you're in the motherland, so to speak,
Mhm.
and things are going well. So you're not in a witness protection program.
No.
We've established that. But you know what, Chris? I laugh about that, but it's not kind of the furthest stretch from reality when you consider that healthcare is a $5 trillion business in the US. And there are very powerful organizations that can't be happy with someone like you that is shining a light on all of the ugliness that is making their shareholders so much money.
Mhm. No, I kind of joke about it,
Oh, I
but
lost your audio. And we're back, folks. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulties. So, truth be told, we are doing most of our interviews, like 99.999% in studio, just because it makes for a better experience. we made an exception, of course, for Chris because Chris is several thousand miles away. And aside from that, she is also an esteemed guest. She's very important. And so for her, we made an exception, but we had some technical issues. I think they were on our end. Apologies, but we're back. And so when we last left off, we were talking about your move across the pond and how it was not to escape any type of threat, but it's not the furthest thing from, the truth. If you think about it, healthcare is now a $5 trillion with a T dollar economy in the US. And there are lots of insurance carriers and players with deep pockets that can't be happy about how vocal you are with what's going on here. So, it's not a stretch to think that you split to just kind of be safe.
Well, I to your point, it's not only are we talking about, tens, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars here, because some of the behavior I think that I've exposed and helped to expose through not only the whistleblower complaint, but a number of other ways. We're talking a massive amount of money, and not just, and people have been hurt over a lot less, but also livelihoods, right? And careers. And I think that some of the behaviors we've seen, I would put into orange jumpsuit territory, I like
Mm.
to say. And that's when people can do desperate things. And I think that it's not completely out of the realm of possibility to think about those things.
Yeah,
But
well, look, and you say some of the behavior like is orange jumpsuit worthy. I think it's more than some. Like, if you think about it, and you certainly, I don't know, I'd like to know if in your legal career, did you ever go down the criminal
no,
attorney type of thing? That was not your gig, but I think back to, and part of the impetus for this show is just people that I revered, going back to Johnny Carson, David Letterman, and then radio. I was a huge Howard Stern fan. And I remember he had a guy call in from, I want to say it was Illinois, who was doing life in prison with no opportunity for parole. And this guy was a go-between in a small time marijuana transaction. I'm talking like $100 transaction. It was nothing.
right.
Life in prison, no possibility of parole. And this guy called in from jail into the show, and I'm listening and I'm like, come on, man. Like, what's wrong with this picture? That's not
Right.
cool. And yet you have people in the healthcare industry that are doing far greater harm than that. Arguably much, much, much worse than that when you think about the impact of the decisions that they make, all in the name of kind of greed and just self, for selfish purposes, all in the name of money. And look, Chris, I am here in America. I'm a proud American. I'm a proud New Yorker. And I love this country. I really do. And I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe that everyone should really strive to be the best. I know that you're a competitor. You instill that in your kids, and we'll get to all of that. But I don't see anything wrong with that. However, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I don't have an answer for this. And my guess would be that you don't have an answer for it either. But I think a huge problem with the healthcare system in the U.S. is that we do have public entities who have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. How could they possibly simultaneously serve their policyholders? And so that is an inherent flaw in our system. And, when you consider that those same insurance carriers also own the three major PBMs, so, the drug cartel, the legal drug cartel, is owned by the insurance carriers, and their fiduciary obligation is to their shareholders.
Right.
So that's a huge conflict of interest. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but given your work and your background, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. So I'll talk about that and then maybe go back to the the orange jumpsuit comment. But so I think one of the, and I'm a capitalist too. I believe in competition and free markets. But I think to say what we have today is anything like that would be a complete mistake. Not just a mistake, but flat out wrong. Um, what we have today is we have put our trust into a system whose, as you said, their fundamental interests are not aligned with ours. And when I say ours, I mean, if you're an employer purchaser, you can't show up to the negotiation table with your PBM or your third party administrator or carrier and expect them to do right by you because it's the right thing, right? Or because you think it's the right thing. As you said, that's United Health Group. Like, they have shareholders, they have a fiduciary duty to get returns to their shareholders, right? It's on me, right, as the purchaser to drive a bargain and a hard bargain in order to get the best deal and for my employees and for myself. Now we've created a system where it's basically impossible to do that as an employer with these big carriers because of the monopolistic behaviors and the vertical integration and so many of the systemic issues that we have. But, we are, I think that's, we can't trust them to be fiduciary. We don't trust any other, sort of supplier or vendor that we do business with and the, sort of out there in the general ethos to say, we're going to look out for your best interests. No, they supply the good or the widget. We are responsible for driving a hard bargain. We are responsible for auditing that contract. But we've essentially outsourced that, or not even outsourced it, just sort of like thrown our hands up and said, it's too complicated. You do that for me. And we've trusted. And we can't do that. And the other
No.
thing is, we are, as a country, right, we are putting vast amounts of federal dollars and resources, and we're saying we have a health crisis, whether it's an obesity crisis or and list any number of social determinants of health, right? We're giving money to healthcare systems and entities to solve these problems that fundamentally disrupt or erode their business model, right? I, as a hospital system, don't need people to get healthier because I need them to be sick to fill my beds. So why am I, as a country, entrusting these very same systems to be responsible for population health, right? Like, that's not their jam. Their jam is to like get heads in beds, make money, and so if we recognize that and stop just pouring money to make them operate as a societal good when they are not, they're providing a service, okay. But I think that we just keep pouring money into a system, like, like I said, like, we just have to recognize like where their interests, and where our interests,
Mm.
and start putting money in the right places. I know I'm oversimplifying.
No, but what you're saying really boils down to common sense, right? And you're exactly spot on. We don't, just kind of turn a blind eye to anybody that we do a business transaction with and say, okay, we're going to sign your unilateral contract, written exactly the way that you like it and want it, and we're good. This is our number one expense after payroll. And this is how we're going to choose to run our organization because we believe that we need to sign that contract to be competitive and to attract the best talent and to retain the best talent. And that is just so far off the mark. It's not even funny. So before I kind of move on, and I will kind of jump around because that's just my ADD kicking in. Let's hear what you had to say about the orange jumpsuits.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, and this is one of the stories highlighted in the book, is the Steward CEO. So Steward Healthcare Systems that just filed for bankruptcy, I guess a little over a year ago. And you talk about, this isn't just money, right? In that case, we have a health system CEO and his cronies and investors on the board, literally draining the lifeblood out of a hospital system in order to turn around and purchase a $30 million yacht, take $68 million in cash out of the hospital system at a time when it's bleeding, at a time when they can't pay their nurses and staff, and when they can't maintain any sort of standard of care in some of their hospitals. And people quite literally die, right, in these facilities. They are in pain in these facilities because there aren't enough nurses. Like, this isn't, we throw around billions and trillions and numbers, but this is so much more than numbers. And what happened to Mr. De La Torre? They filed bankruptcy. There's a complaint against him for fraudulent transactions because he took money out of the company when he shouldn't have and bought a yacht. But you know what has happened with that case? Nothing. A complaint's been filed. He asked for an extension, and now he doesn't even have to answer the complaint until sometime in March, right? And that process will probably take years. Meanwhile, maybe the fuel on the yacht is a hardship, but it really is sad.
That's egregious. And, and so it's no wonder that, there's so much of uproar in social media about, the gunning down of the CEO of United Health Group in New York City. And that's not to say that, I advocate for that. That was horrific. And no one deserves street justice, regardless of, how bad things are, right? There's no place for that in a civilized society. But you can appreciate with stuff like that going on, like, put yourself in the shoes of someone that has a loved one that literally dies because of the decisions that you make as a CEO. And you think about, what kind of emotions would you feel? And so it's not too hard to put yourself in those shoes and feel the rage. And it's, again, in no way, shape, or form am I justifying what happened. It was outright, it was the worst of what we are as humans, in my opinion, right? But at the end of the day, you can certainly kind of understand the frustration, the anger, the outrage when people are, literally dying in beds, but you have some schmuck that needs a yacht in the Mediterranean to be happy in life. Like, come on, that's just that is, and when you put it into perspective, like using my go-between pot analogy. Like, come on, this poor kid is serving life in prison. He'll never see the light of day again. And this jerk off needs a yacht in the Mediterranean, and he's going to get a pat on the back or a pat on the hands, right, because he can afford the world's greatest attorney and defense. It's aggravating. So that's going to take us down a whole other rabbit hole.
I'll do better for you.
Yeah, go ahead. Give it to us.
And now I can speak freely because the settlement's done and all releases are effective. I was actually threatened with criminal liability from the state of New Jersey for taking documents in order to prove the whistleblower case.
Oh my God. Is that a true story?
Oh, it's a true story. I had to hire criminal counsel while the settlement agreement was being hashed out. Because as you saw in the settlement agreement, the settlement was essentially contingent on me not being named as a proper relator, whistleblower in the case. And in part of those discussions, they indicated that they were exploring, and when I say they, I'm talking about the state's attorney general's office, whom I handed the documents to in order to prove the $100 million case, threatened criminal liability for me taking the documents.
So tell us a little bit about that, because that is fascinating to me. It's really, like, for anybody that's listening that is a TV junkie like I am, a Netflix junkie, an HBO junkie, a documentary junkie. And by the way, I was one of the co-producers on It's Not Personal, It's Just Healthcare, which Chris Deacon appears in. She's a big part of that documentary. And if you haven't, yet seen it, please go to our website, benefixa.com, BENEFIXA.com, and you scroll down on the homepage. You could put in your email address and like your first name or something, and that will give you access to the documentary. But while we're on that, what a fantastic job, Chris. I think Bart and his team, the executive producer and director of the documentary, did a phenomenal job, and I think you did an amazing job. So thank you for your work in that film. And I don't know what kind of feedback you've gotten, but really, I've never come across anything that quite so explicitly shines a light on what's wrong with healthcare, particularly if you are an employer. It is an important piece for you to see.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the feedback I've gotten is, why isn't everybody watching this? So,
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of your kind of background, as you said, you were an Army brat. You were bouncing around quite a bit. Eventually settled in New Jersey. You spent the longest amount of time in the state of New Jersey. How did you? Let's skip past the journey to law school. I would assume that this was something that was just in you, and that was just the natural progression of things. How do you land a gig in what was it specifically, your title, and what agency specifically did you work for?
yeah, it was Director of State Health Benefits within the Division of Pensions and Benefits, which is an agency of the state treasury in New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
Yeah.
And so you were responsible for a plan with over 300,000 employees or lives. It was
about 800,000 lives. Yeah.
800,000 lives, over 340,000 employees, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of lives. And I think I did the math, and at the time in 2019, it worked out to be, I don't know, just under like $20,000 per employee per year was the cost of the plan. Which is, think about that. Like, I just did an open enrollment for a group that I've had for many, many years. And the cost for family coverage for a platinum plan, small group in New York State, give me a guess. What do you think the premium is?
40.
Just shy of $50,000
Okay.
a year.
Yep.
And so I showed the employees, like I during my presentation, I put up like, a car because you don't think about it, right? But it's a fucking car, a nice car every year that you're buying for your employees. And in this case, the group is super generous. They pay 80% of the premiums. So,
you're giving them a car, but you're also saying, you have to spend $1,000 before you can actually drive the car.
Right.
I mean, all of the
right.
Crazy.
And that's a conversation for a different day. But getting back to New Jersey, you have a lot of responsibility, right? There's and folks, I talk about it all the time. Like, there's a balance with a health plan, and there's the health care part, and your insurance does zero to dispense one iota of health care to your people. And then there's the insurance part, which is the transfer of risk. And as Chris said, at the end of the day, you could be spending north of $40,000 for a policy that still has you forking out the first $1,000, $2,000 before you receive care. Usually with those plans, there's copays involved and stuff like that. But you'd be shocked. Many plans north of $20,000 certainly have, a deductible that's many thousands of dollars, which most Americans, according to statistics, have less than $400 saved for a rainy day, which makes them, in my view, functionally uninsured, right? So at the end of the day, you look at this problem, and you are someone that strikes me, we don't know each other that long, but you strike me as someone that is not going to back down from a fight, and that takes their responsibility very seriously. And so I think when you stepped into that role, you looked at what was going on and said, well, this doesn't add up. And you started asking some common sense questions. And rather than, just have me pontificate, I'd love to hear your story. So you get there, and where do you go from there?
Yeah, so it's funny. When I first got to the division, I didn't step immediately. So I came from the governor's office. I didn't step immediately into the director role. I think that was probably on my trajectory. Um, and I don't know if it was a cruel joke or a way to get me to quit, but the first project I actually had was, they said, Chris, you're going to be in charge of the dependent eligibility verification audit for 320,000 people, 37 public sector unions. And I said, okay, yeah, bring it. And project managed that. I think we ended up saving $60 million. Didn't have one final level appeal in terms of, members who took it all the way because they were disagreeing with our position. Got all the public sector unions on board, and it like floored, I think, some people how smoothly it went. I mean, there's nothing smooth about a dependent eligibility audit for 320,000 people at one time,
And
but
explain to folks who might not be in the
oh
benefits
yeah.
space, why is that important, and what is it exactly?
Yeah, so as the name would sort of indicate, you put dependents on your plan. If you're a family or if you're a parent with two children or spouse, but usually, your employer might not know if you got a divorce, or maybe they need to verify that, the adopted child is actually adopted. And it's not necessarily because, necessitated because we think people have, some sort of desire to scam the system. But if you have a grandchild, let's say, who has a very serious medical condition and doesn't have access to private healthcare and would otherwise be on Medicaid, it might be really tempting to put that member on the state health plan because
Mhm.
our benefits are so generous. And so we hadn't done one for about 12 years. And we just know that is something that should be done fairly regularly. And because of our online enrollment system up until my tenure was all on paper,
Oh
it
boy.
was very it was very difficult. Yes, very difficult to validate eligibility. So we
How the
essentially,
hell do you do paper with 320,000 people? How does that happen?
um,
Who's got the job of sorting that pile?
well, I actually had to do the calculations to justify the budget for moving things to an online system,
Ugh.
because I no one was accounting for the fact for 3 months, our entire health benefits policy planning and operations department had to put down their pencils of everything else they were doing and key in applications. That's what was, and we were paying overtime, 3 months of time for everybody to do that. And I said, this is because the sticker price to moving for an online system is not cheap, right? As you might imagine.
Sure.
But neither is taking 3 months of staff time to do nothing else but key in applications.
Oh yeah.
So we did change that over, but headache beyond all belief. And I mean, you'd get people's social security numbers in wrong and dates of birth wrong, and you know how complicated that can be. You show up to
Sure.
the doctor, the dates of birth don't match. Like, now it's a problem.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but
But
yeah,
it takes someone like you that is, kind of committed and is going to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work, because make no mistake about it, it's hard work to get that job done. And so it sounds to me like, they threw something at you where they're like, all right, this is where she's going to go to die.
right. I think
And
that was the plan.
it didn't exactly go down that way, right?
No, it didn't go down that way. I think I not only proved my competence, proved my ability to work with the public sector unions, which was really important and became really important in my tenure. So very shortly thereafter was named the director, and I guess the rest is history.
Right. So, well, history for you, but not for our audience that hasn't read your book. So, you get in, and what's kind of your first order of business? Give me like a day in the life. Like you get there on day one, And it's always you're always a little out of sorts, I think, no matter what you're doing, right? Day one of a new position, it's like, okay, what am I going to do here? What do you go in there and what do you, as you're thinking about this, and I'm sure you put a lot of thought into it, what's your process? What does it look like?
My marching orders were number one, to plug a $250 million hole. So we needed
Oh,
to find 250 million in savings. And I also knew that we had to procure our PBM, our TPA, and we had a law passed that required a claims review process. So I needed to run several RFPs at the same time simultaneously. So I had a whiteboard and I mapped out what our contracting timeline would look like so we could line up what needed to happen when. And when implementations and kickoff, like you said, it's getting messy and it's rolling up your sleeves and
sure.
doing that work. Um, but the TPA RFP was probably like number one priority because that was where most of our spend's going through, and we needed to do things differently. I think that one of the most memorable moments for me was sitting in a room with our consultants and everybody around the table at our kickoff for our TPA RFP. And I was told, this is how we evaluate. We evaluate off discount and we evaluate off this disruption report. And, a little playing dumb, but also being a little naive and new. I said, well, yes, but discount off what? Right? Like we have to know unit costs.
The starting price.
And
Important.
and then disruption, I said, I understand that we don't want to have people forced to move their doctors and disrupt treatment. However, if we are disrupting, right, and removing the lowest 10% of our providers because they have really bad outcomes, like
Hmm.
I'm okay with that. So where are we accounting for that? Well, we don't account for that. That's not part of the disruption analysis. And
Hmm.
so I realized like we needed to do things differently. And I would say that was probably that contract and that RFP was the primary focus for
And
the.
there's a lot of moving parts, like for folks that aren't familiar, right? So you have a TPA, a third party administrator that really is kind of they're kind of like the quarterback, right? For the plan. They are basically handling, payroll, taking, money from payroll, getting it to the appropriate vendors. Depending upon the arrangement, they could be triaging claims, adjudicating claims, all of these things. And then you have the consultant who may be separate from the broker. You have you have the insurance carrier. You may use the insurance carrier's PBM, maybe not. So you're kind of coming into this ecosystem, and the word that I'm going to use is everybody that's sitting around the table that doesn't know you is looking at you as a threat. It's
Mm,
like
oh, yes,
uh,
yes.
someone who's in the room, but she doesn't know it yet, but she's gonna be playing the game according to our rules, right? I'm sure that's what's going on. That's what they're thinking, and you're there with one objective in mind. I want to plug this gaping multi-million-dollar hole. I want to deliver better care and outcomes to our members. And, that's basically it. It's not much more. You can't make it much more simple than lower costs and improve quality, right? That's a pretty good baseline to start with. Episode of Broken Healthcare Podcast is brought to you by Benefixa Healthcare Consultants. Visit benefixa.com to learn what's possible. Reduce the cost of healthcare for your organization, deliver better outcomes for your people, and yes, design health plans that give your people a path to $0 out-of-pocket costs for healthcare. Visit benefixa.com today. And so how did that meeting end up?
I think we walked out of it all, sort of retreating to corners. But when we got back together, I tried to set a tone of collaboration and partnership. And I think we throw those terms around like a lot in this space. without really understanding what they mean for the client. But we were in the driver's seat, right? We were going to challenge them and push them to do things differently. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, I think the professionals on the other side of the table were actually really enthusiastic and energized by the fact that somebody wanted to do something differently. I think that they were on autopilot. And when we shook them off that trajectory, they were really excited to run an RFP where we were looking at unit costs guarantees, and where we were looking at total cost of care guarantees, as opposed to straight up disruption and discount. So that being said, the vendors, right, I think that they really saw, potential disruption.
Mm.
And I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, that's the way we've always done it. So much so much so that I actually put up, in the division, we don't say these things. We don't say those words ever. We've always done it that way, or
Right.
that's the
Right.
way it's done. That cannot be an answer.
No, that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Like you can't do that. And so when as you dove in and you started looking, there's the famous story that you tell in your talk about the meeting where you call, I think it was Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield in, and you're meeting with your team, and the meeting is going, pretty much according to plan until the governor walks in.
Yep.
So maybe you could share that story with us.
Sure. So as I said, was talking about the RFP and contract that we put in place for that new year plan year 2020 and 21 had some really interesting components. It had navigation and advocacy services. It had some language like lesser of logic, meaning, never going to pay over the billed amount when processing claims. And we noticed, as the contract was playing out, that we weren't necessarily recognizing some of the savings and having the experience that we had hoped. Brought those matters to the attention of the state, actually filed a formal complaint with the Contract Compliance Audit Union, which is part of the state. And in that process of trying to resolve some of these things, we had a big powwow in Trenton, one of the first in-person meetings after COVID. And, I think we had Horizon on their heels in terms of needing to come back and actually show up with something to make these things right. When unannounced, out of the blue, the governor walked into the room and proceeded to shake hands with everybody on the corporate side of the table, backslapping, especially with their government affairs guy, oh, I love this guy. I heard you guys were in the building. It's great to see you. Very limited, cold response to our side of the table, which
Right.
was myself and all the state folks. And as he was leaving the room, he said, we can handle this. Let's make this, we can all take care of this, and walked out. And I actually spoke to a Horizon, our account manager at Horizon afterwards, and she said that the shock on her side of the table at that entrance to the meeting, the unannounced entrance, was, you couldn't overstate it.
And so what does that tell you? It was above their pay grade, right? So I'm reading in between the lines here completely, right? So I don't know this for a fact, but my brain is very visual. Like I think about that scene, and I'm sure there was a lot of tension in that room until the governor walks in.
Yeah.
And he
If
basically,
you could imagine a balloon and then just
yeah, because you're holding their feet to the fire, saying, we need more transparency, we need greater accountability, and we have options. You're not the only game in town, and walks the governor.
Right.
So would you imagine that there might have been a phone call between some higher up executive at Blue Cross and the
Oh, no,
company?
there was.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody, I don't even think they could doubt that. I
right.
mean,
But
we
they,
know,
but they were blindsided by it. They didn't expect it. They didn't know it was
right,
coming. And in walks the
right,
governor,
right. Yeah.
right? So how could you possibly be effective at your job and execute, a negotiation if all of a sudden in walks the leader of the state and he's like, "Yeah, we're all good. We're all
Yeah.
good, right?"
Well, I mean, the short answer is in that environment, I had to make the decision that I couldn't because I was told, live with, live with this, do all the good you can in other ways, but Horizon will be our partner
Right.
for the foreseeable future. And you can either get on board with that or not.
No, and listen, it was the state of New Jersey, and I can't help but think The Sopranos. Like, you write in your book that you were basically told to stand down at a meeting with one of your higher ups at a fucking diner.
Yeah. Well, Starbucks in Trenton is not far off.
Starbucks in Trenton. There you go. Like,
Yes.
you can't make this shit up. That's
No.
crazy.
Well, and
Uh,
it's not the first time. So I don't know if some of your listeners might be familiar with the hospital price transparency rule went into effect in 2021. We were really excited about it as a health plan because we were prepared to ingest that information and then track it to our claims to see what we were paying as a percent. If we were paying the right as according to the hospital files. But none of the hospitals in New Jersey posted files on day 1 or day 30. And what we decided to do as a result was have Horizon send out a letter informing the hospitals that our contract with them required that they be in compliance with federal law. And because they were not out of compliance, that was a problem for Horizon's contract with us. So trying to exert that leverage. And the letter was sent, and within 5 minutes, I had a very angry call from the Office of Healthcare Transparency and Affordability within the administration, just livid that I would have the audacity to reach out to the hospitals. Within 5 minutes, their CEOs were on the phone with the governor's office saying, you cannot do this. Stop questioning us. You don't, tell this person to stand down. And I was asked to apologize internally and to the hospitals.
did you?
No. I mean, I apologized internally. I said, but
Yeah.
at that point, that was the first probably of many signs.
No, and you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I mean, how demotivating and deplorable, right? It's you should have been applauded for the work that you were doing. But I guess it really is an inside look at the machine, right? It's the beast, and it's the way our system works. There are politics involved, and unfortunately, our politicians who are supposedly public servants are making decisions not always for the greater good. That's not to throw them all under the bus. They exist for a reason, I suppose. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to do your job in the name of close to 500,000, employees, more than 500,000 if you include, dependents and members, and you're being roadblocked every step you take, that's, if that's the environment that we're operating in, then it's high time for change. I feel the same about, the inner workings. And you went to school at GW or NDC. I think about, what's going on Capitol Hill, and I can't help but shake my head. And just like I'm sure you watched the RFK hearings, confirmation hearings, and the Senate committee hearing that happened, not long ago, where he was basically vilified and grilled by the left. And I just shook my head and I said, this is not a left or right thing. This
Right.
is this is about the health of all Americans. It should not be politicized. And the scrutiny that he was up against was just deplorable, in my opinion. And I think we need to start, as citizens, we need to really hold our public officials accountable. They need to be reminded that they're in service of the
Mhm.
public, and for them to make decisions that are clearly driven by anything but their own, self-interest. It's just it's so apparent to me. It has to be apparent to anyone that's bothering to pay attention. And I think if we're gonna, get this $5 trillion train off of that track and on the right track, there need to be some changes with public policy.
Yeah, I think that the way I actually wrote about this the other day is there's this assumption that like $1 in healthcare savings is the same $1 in campaign contributions. Like, yes, they're both a dollar and technically of similar value, but they're very different. And every politician has their ratio. What do I mean by that? $250 million in savings to the taxpayers and public servants of New Jersey, right? That $250 million can be far outweighed by for example, $1 million campaign contribution, or even a $500,000 campaign contribution, or a promise of support in the next gubernatorial race or whatever the political favor is. The personal realization for campaign contributions and lobbying and pork deals at home and getting to hold the golden shovel at the next tower breaking ground for the hospital, like those things, while they may seem, because technically they are less financially, they're so much more important to that one politician than that $250 million or that $500 million. And I think we're naive to think that that calculus doesn't exist. Every politician has their ratio,
Yeah.
and some are worse than others.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the no margin, no mission mantra that so many hospitals have convinced themselves is like a valid thing. Elected leaders, I think most of them get into this because they want to do good. And
Yeah.
then they fall into this like, well, I can't do good if I don't get reelected. And if I don't get reelected,
Right.
if I don't take this money, then I probably won't get reelected. And then the
Right.
cycle just becomes sooner and sooner and sooner, to the point where you're never actually focused on doing the right thing. You're focused on getting reelected. So maybe someday you could.
Yeah, what a slippery slope. It really bothers me though, because at the end of the day, these politicians who are taking these campaign contributions, and no one, I did a piece on this after that Senate committee hearing on Maha, like a progress report update. I listened, I watched the whole thing, and then I did a short piece, just kind of summarizing it. And it blew me away how divided, the senators were, and how, vocal they were, horrified that, Senator Kennedy was, going to bring harm to the American people and yada, yada, yada. And even, Senator Bernie Sanders was like, you're mean to tell me that you're the only one that doesn't, and RFK was like, are you saying that my campaign was funded by Big Pharma? Because I can assure you it wasn't. I just had to laugh at that. But the thing that troubles me, Chris, is they really have blood on their hands. They're taking these campaign contributions, they're holding the golden shovel, they're cutting the tape, and they're selling their fellow Americans, their family, their friends down the river. Every goddamn one of them. And it like blows my mind. Like, can't you find another way to fund your campaign other than taking money from Big Pharma and insurance carriers, right? They're the two biggest lobbying arms in DC, donate billions of dollars to have quote unquote conversations with, congressmen and government agencies. What do you think they're talking about? They're not talking about making things better
Right.
for you
No.
and me. They're talking about, hey, well, how do we keep things just the same?
Well, and I've been, I was in the governor's office, so not necessarily in DC, but you get the same sort of lobbyists coming into the governor's office to talk about under the guise of education, right? Like, so when Optum's lobbyists come in to talk about the pharmaceutical landscape and what's really in the best interest for, and why PBMs are so great at protecting the public fisc. And the problem is what you have on the receiving end of that, you're not talking to Trump, you're not talking to Biden, you're not talking to 3 levels down. You're talking to 26 and 27-year-old staffers who this is all new to them, and they think they're getting educated when they're getting brainwashed,
Yeah.
right? And then they're reporting up like, "Oh, no, 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 we're on board with this because this is a good idea for the American people. We're
Yeah.
on board with this because this is good for business." Like, that's actually, I mean, if the sausage being made is very, very ugly.
Well, I mean, but that's what happens when you have 3 lobbyists for every congressperson, right?
Yes.
There's, plenty of them to go around and meet governors, at their offices or their staff throughout the country. But we're at a tipping point. Our friend Marshall Allen was the first guy that I heard speak publicly at a conference, and he said we're in a healthcare bubble. He was the first guy I heard ever say that, and I said it really hit home with me. I was like, that motherfucker's right.
Mhm.
Like that is the truth, and I believe he is right. It's unsustainable. Uh, you can't have Americans expecting to ride on the rails of a system where the average cost of an insurance policy is $17,000 a year, and far more than that in the major metro areas. It's just not sustainable. And so there's so much that we should probably do like another 6 hours of this because I feel like there's so much to talk to you about. One thing that I do want to dive into a little bit that you touched on are our hospital systems flying under the banner of nonprofits, and so you go into detail in your book about that. And I think back to The Price We Pay that was written by Dr. McCary, who's our FDA commissioner, and he wrote a chapter in his book about a hospital in rural Texas or on the Texas border, I think, of Arizona. And basically, the hospital system was in the practice of going after all of their patients who had balance bills, and they sued everybody in the town, including the judge.
Right.
Right. I think it was Carlsbad, if I don't want
Yeah.
to misquote that. But so, I think the other issue, Chris, is we tend to revere and put on a pedestal our insurance carriers, our doctors, our surgeons, and our hospitals. And I do think that in the case of doctors, nurses, surgeons who get into this, they're not the villains by and large in this story, right? You have bad actors everywhere, but at the end of the day, I think that those folks by and large get into that profession because it's a calling and they genuinely want to help people. But the fact that now the entities that they work for once upon a time were private institutions, now they're being gobbled up by private equity. They are generating tremendous amounts of money, and they're flying under the radar and getting away with not paying taxes, which hurts their local communities. But they're also doing a whole bunch of other stuff that is not in the best interest of their patients or their communities. So I know that this is an area that you've researched and written about quite a bit. I'd love to hear your take on, the state of healthcare as it pertains to hospitals in the United States.
Yeah. So I think, and we could talk for 6 hours. One of the biggest challenges or issues I see today, especially with all of the mergers and acquisitions, which are really picking up, at a breakneck pace right now, is you used to have a community hospital, and you say, well, what kept that hospital in check from a profit perspective, even if it's not taxed, right? But it's nonprofit. And the community hospital would have, like a school principal on its board and a leading business person and maybe a teacher, or community folks that were on the board of this hospital whose interests, right, because they're there to not only protect the hospital and the hospital's financial interests, and its mission, but they're also members of the community that care about the community and that are part of the community. Well, now that we have these systems that are completely sort of, not part of the community, right? You have a board operating out of Manhattan office space for hospitals that span the country. Like, they don't really care about the communities in which they operate. I mean, they do on paper, maybe in their community needs assessment, but there's no check and balance on, how is this impacting communities? And once we lost that, we just lost so much. So I think the consolidation that's playing out in the market right now is probably our biggest challenge, because there's no market force that can reverse it. I think, unfortunately, here we are going to have to rely on elected leaders to do something about this, because we've reached.
Don't say that.
Well, they're not going to break up themselves, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off bombastically, but the answer is never to expect government to fix things. It's just, that is almost never the answer. But I agree with you. It's like, we do need an intervention, and how do we do it? And I for one believe that people have to start taking matters into their own hands, and I think it starts with more than half of Americans getting their insurance coverage through their place of work. I think that it starts with employers and organizations that procure health insurance on behalf of their employees. I think that that's really where, like, employers there needs to be a shakeup. They need to understand that this is a expense that has a supply chain and can be managed just as you do anything else that you procure in your business. And, I heard you say, that you put out to RFP multiple times. And I wonder if that process is flawed as well for most large organizations. What are the criteria? Who are you letting into the RFP process? Maybe a little old broker like me that's not attached to a skyscraper in Manhattan would have something of value to add to that process, right? But on paper, it's kind of part of the process is, okay, let's make it so hard that if they don't check these boxes, they're not invited to the playground. I think that's part of the problem. So I think that people who are in the positions of managing benefits, CFOs, finance professionals, need to start paying attention to a message like yours. Pick up your book, read it, kind of pull back the curtain, understand, what's going on. I think when you see Oz behind that curtain, it paints a completely different picture than the picture that's being painted for you, right? It's a whole different ballgame, but you need people that are true leaders, are bold, and are willing to take risks on behalf of their employees. And folks, look, if you're listening to this and you can't afford your share of the costs, you're not alone. That's most Americans. Most Americans can't afford their share of the costs. But I'm encouraged by folks like you, Chris, who are out there, doing your best to grab a megaphone, to let people know it doesn't have to be this way. And the truth of the matter is, I'm really encouraged by the direct primary care movement in America. And I think that the more we can, kind of support those doctors that are starting up these practices that get back to having a relationship with their patient and then aren't referring the patient to that big hospital system, to the extent that the hospital can bill and jack up, the fees and the expenses for services to the extent that they do. The more we can control that narrative,
Right.
I think the better. And I don't know what you feel about the DPC movement. I'm very encouraged by that. But every time I go down this road and I think there's hope. I can't help, the cynic in me is like, but you're up against the $5 trillion buzzsaw, Ray. So it's not, but hey, David did beat Goliath, right? So it's possible, but you have to be bold. And I don't, I guess, parting words, what would you say to, people who are now managing benefits as you once did, or a finance professional, a CFO that might be listening in? What advice would you give them?
So if you think about procuring your healthcare services as opposed to healthcare coverage or healthcare insurance, you bring a mindset of purchasing services, right? Like you don't just go to, any other vendor that provides services for your company and don't ask what it costs, don't ask what, for the receipt or the invoice and just sort of write a blank check. Start thinking about it as something like services that you're actually procuring. It brings to mind my husband is not in the healthcare business. And I went to his office one day to pick up a file, and I walk by a big conference room with glass panels, and there's a bunch of suits sitting around a table. They're all looking up at a projector screen, has numbers on it. I said, "Oh, that looks like an important meeting. What's going on in there?" And he goes, "Oh, they're going through their monthly. They go through our high cost claims." And I was like, "How did I not know about this?" Right? Like, how did you not tell me?
Right.
And he goes, no, like our property and casualty. So, they do a lot of heavy industry, forklift, type things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so they go through any major claims that they have, like spend hours analyzing what can we do better? What can we do differently? And like,
Right.
that is the mentality that you need to bring to your healthcare spend. That
100%.
laser focus, like you
Right.
can do it. Bring
Yeah.
that mentality.
So you
Yeah,
have to get curious, and you have to approach it as you would anything else. You have to, this is a problem that you're trying to solve, right?
right.
You're not going to do it. You're not going to solve the problem from inside the box. You got to get out. You gotta try to examine it from 30,000 feet and then just kind of drill down, same as you would anything else. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, if you were left to your own devices,
Yes.
if they anointed you instead of pushed you back, saying you're barking up the wrong tree here, Missy.
Yeah, right.
You keep going down this road, you're going to have to go. And of course, you made a decision to leave. But if you were left on your own, knowing what you know about our healthcare system, what was the budget that you were in charge of, the overall budget for just healthcare in the state of New Jersey at the time?
6 billion, 7 billion bucks.
Okay. So if you put your thinking cap on and you said, I want you to answer this question. I am certain that knowing what I know and not having any restriction, I could have reduced the budget by
$1.5 billion without, and I say that without touching members' benefits, copays, coinsurance.
no.
This is strictly cleanup on the back end.
Clean up on the back end and essentially, if anything, delivering better health outcomes to members. $1.5 billion, that's real money. Right? And so you have to just say what a shame for the hardworking residents and taxpayers of the state of New Jersey. And it's not New Jersey, and it certainly wasn't you. It's just it's the system, and that's going on everywhere. Right? It's going on everywhere. And so, look, we're probably an hour and a half in. We can go on for days. And so, if you would honor us, perhaps the next time you're in New York, come to our studio, and we'll talk about more stuff because I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface today.
I know. I can't believe it's been an hour and a half.
But having said all that, what is your day job now? What's your gig? What do you do?
I spend a lot of time writing and content development. It actually takes a lot of time to stay sharp in as many of the subjects that I feel like I need to stay sharp in to stay relevant to my audience and also the clients I work with in the policy space.
Yeah.
And, talking to folks like you and trying to spread the word. I mean, I think that education in this space is so huge. I think we all know something's wrong, right? I think you could ask anybody in America, like, is your health insurance, working for you, or does our system work? And nobody's going to say a resounding yes.
Yeah.
But the issue is what is it? Nobody can really point to a thing or a system. And so education is a huge hurdle that hopefully I can play a role in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I definitely appreciate your contribution. The world needs more people like you that are willing to, just ask the hard questions, just look at stuff through the lens of common sense and say, can we do better here? Can we do better for our members? Can we do better for our people? And at the end of the day, I think that's the most important question. That's where you got to start. And then as you unpack that, I think what you'll find, if you're courageous enough to go down that path, is that, yeah, you can do a hell of a lot better than the status quo. It's really just a matter of figuring out what that looks like. And to your point, education is a big piece of it, right? We have to bring our employees into the fold so that they understand, it's not like a combative, it should not be thought of as like a combative, union negotiation with an employer, right? It shouldn't be a struggle. In fact, I think, if we have any, union delegates or plan administrators listening, I think this could really be a bridge. Like if you focus on healthcare and you say, we want to deliver the absolute best possible healthcare experience for your members. And if you take the journey with me and we show you what that looks like, there's a way to save your members a ton of money. And in the process, your people will be better cared for. They'll be happier. They'll be healthier. And this is possible, but you got to stop drinking the Kool-Aid from the status quo fountain.
Right.
That stuff is not gonna do your body good.
Well, I heard a quote, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but the American healthcare system can be one of the most dangerous things to your health if not interacted with appropriately. And which is very true, right? 40% of spinal fusion surgeries are unnecessary, right?
I know.
So as an employer, I think to your point, it is absolutely vital to, pay attention to your employees and give them credit for, being a part of this system and having survived it for this long and be a partner with them. I mean, you would never, going back to your car analogy, it's almost as if I'm handing you over a new Volvo, right? $50,000 car, or a forklift. And I'm saying, good luck with that. Without an instruction manual, like you've never had a driving lesson. And I'm just giving you this thing. And it is extremely dangerous and complex if you don't know how to use it. And so we have to sort of bring that mindset. This is a really valuable thing for all of us that we're all paying for. And you do have to know how to use it and use it appropriately. And not in sort of a pejorative way, but in a way that is beneficial for both your health and our collective financial well-being.
Yeah, for sure. It's, people probably listening to this are like, I didn't realize I was getting a Volvo every year. Yeah. And these same poor bastards are probably like, I've been working on the same laptop for 6 years and they won't give me a new one.
Right.
Right.
Or you think like, I know that, you hand in a receipt for like a work dinner maybe, right? And it's $1,000 and accounting's like, where's the itemized receipt? Like, did you drink wine? Did you have appetizers? What is this? Right.
Yeah.
And you have to justify that. Meanwhile, like we're just forking over with like nothing, no information. And it's, we have to pay attention and treat it a lot more like, with a lot more attention than it's getting.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a construction worker, they make you turn in your used pair of work gloves before they give you a new one. It's like, what?
Right.
Why don't you just focus on our healthcare? How about that?
Right.
I'm sure you could save a couple of dollars there if you tried. All right, Chris, I'm gonna kind of call it there. It was an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, I think is how they say it across the pond.
I'm not adopting the British terminology.
You can take the girl out of New Jersey, but you can't take the Jersey out of the girl.
Correct.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you for the work that you did in public service. Because while you weren't a politician, you were absolutely working in service to the public, and the work that you did in New Jersey. I'm sorry that you couldn't do more good, but you're kind of limited by the constraints of the system, right? There's not much you could do about that. But amazing work that you do. One more time, I'm going to give your book a plug: The Great American Healthcare Heist. By Chris Deacon. I think you can find it on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah.
Go at it. It's a great read, a great eye opener, and it's coming from the perspective of someone that is not a broker, is not someone
I'm not
that
trying to sell you anything.
Yeah, she's not trying to sell you a goddamn thing. It's just an eye opener, though. Really well done. I enjoyed it. It was a great read. And thanks for continuing to fight the good fight. If folks want to find you other than the book, how would they go about? Do you want to hear from anyone?
Yeah, no, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and usually will respond to messages. But I put a lot of great information up there, and occasionally have lengthier stuff on Substack. But that's the place to find me, I would say.
LinkedIn is best, and it's Chris Deacon, Deacon.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, folks, until next time, peace and love. Love always. Take care.
All right, that's a wrap. Hit like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.